Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Chantel and I like to talk about books and sometimes movies and maybe even occasionally television shows. Today, for my video, I am actually going to be doing a tag. I got tagged to do, this is called the Girl Scout cookie tag, which is super cute and fun. I was tagged by Netta at basically Netta, so thanks Netta for tagging me. And this tag was originally created by Melinda at A Web of Stories, so thanks for creating the tag, Melinda. This is a really cute little tag with some fun questions that I'm going to answer about some of my favorite books. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started with the questions. I did write them down. The first one is Trefoils. So these are the classic little shortbread cookies that they make. And the question is a classic novel that you love. And I'm going to, for this one, I'm going to mention a novel, a book that I haven't really talked about much on my channel before, because there's a lot of classic novels that I love, and that is Dracula by Bram Stoker. Yeah, I really like that. I really like this book. It's obviously, I don't know that I need to explain to you the basic plot of Dracula. It's sort of the OG vampire novel, but some of the reasons why I love it are because Bram Stoker really effectively plays with ideas of tradition versus modernity, and juxtaposing those two things throughout the course of the novel. I think those themes are really strong and really well done in the novel. He wrote this in the very late 19th century, so I believe this was published in 1897, but don't quote me on that. So this was very much a transitional period of we're moving from one world into a new century, really. And so the sort of the clash of the old world versus this sort of newer modern world is really strong and apparent in the story of Dracula. Dracula is very much an old world kind of monster, and he is defeated largely through this sort of scientific understanding, right? Like the thing about Van Helsing in Dracula in the novel, and not, you know, this doesn't necessarily come through in sort of our cultural understanding of Van Helsing, but Van Helsing in the novel is a physician. He's a world-renowned doctor of science, right? He's a scientist. He's a man of logic and reason, but he also knows a lot about the old world and the folklore and the traditions, and he combines those two things very well within his character, such that he's able to assist the rest of our heroes in overcoming the villain, this villain of the superstitious, folkloric, scary, dark Eastern Europe. And yeah, and like the use of the use of the typewriter, the fact that the novel itself is epistolary, which means that it's actually a collection of it's a collection of journal entries, diary entries, letters, newspaper clippings, things like that, and a lot of stuff that is explicitly talked about as having been typed up, right? Mina especially does a lot of typing at the typewriter. She's basically the stenographer for all of our main characters. So it's really, I think it's a really fascinating thematic play between these concepts, really. And also just the character of Dracula is, of course, is so overwhelming, that it's really, it's a classic for a reason, and it's a really fun read too, and I find it to be a really quick read, generally speaking. It's very easy to read, and very enjoyable to read. So anyway, that's the first question. The second question is lemon ups. They're actually not called lemon ups where I'm at. the ones I have are lemonades. I know because I have a package of them sitting upstairs in my kitchen right now. But yeah, this one is a book you find inspiring. This one actually had the most trouble with. I don't know why. I think maybe it's just because I don't necessarily think of like individual specific books as being inspiring per se. I do like, I take a lot of inspiration and a lot of thoughts and things from a lot of different books that I read, and bits and pieces here and there from a lot of different books that I read. But yeah, I mean, like any book that I really love and that I think is really great, I find inspiring in some way or form. But for this one, I am doing a bit of a repeat because really the first book that comes to mind when I think of something that inspires me or something that, yeah, something that inspires me is Jane Eyre. I think that the character of Jane is one of the best and most and strongest female characters that I've encountered in all of literature, and I think she's one of the most, yeah, I think she's one of the most admirable, I would say. So yeah, I find Jane as a character to be very admirable. Um, she's very strong-willed. She has a moral compass. She uh, will not compromise her morality, her soul, as she believes it. Um, and she refuses to let others dictate the terms of her life, I would say. Which, again, I find very admirable, very aspirational. So that's Jane Eyre. Number 3 is S'mores, a comforting book. Again, a number of books kind of come to mind. I have several that I would consider like comfort reads that I go back to again and again. But probably the first one that comes to mind is The Hobbit. Um, like like there's just so much there that I just take just a real genuine pleasure in going back to and revisiting when I just need something to lift me up. Um, you know, it's a, again, it's a pretty simple story. You know, it's very episodic, so it's easy to read sort of chapter by chapter as you have the time. It's also not very long, unlike Lord of the Rings, which it can be kind of an undertaking. Um, and you know, it's there and back again story. It's an adventure. It's got lots of friendship. It's got lots of really fun, cute, and ultimately uplifting uh, little events in it. And you know, it has a nice happy ending, and it wraps up very well as like as its own sort of standalone novel, even taken separate from the Lord of the Rings. It just it works really well. Um, and it reads so easily. Tolkien's narration in it is so fun and so tongue-in-cheek that it's a joy and a pleasure to read, and so I come back to it all the time. So yeah, the next one, number 4, is Adventurefuls, an Adventurous book. This one I had a really hard time choosing between two, an old favorite and a much more recent favorite, so I'm just going to use both. The old favorite is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I read this book when I was in high school, and it's just so fun. It's a rip-roaring good time. If you haven't read The Count of Monte Cristo, what are you doing with your life? Go find it, find a copy. It's very long. I will give you that. Like it's quite a chunker, but it's not a difficult read. At least the translation that I read was not difficult. It's, you know, it's not super dense or complicated. It's a pretty classic revenge story about a guy who's got his whole life ahead of him. Everybody loves him. He's got a bright future. He's got a girlfriend he loves, and then somebody betrays him and frames him for a crime that he didn't commit and gets him sent to prison. And from there, he begins to formulate a plan of vengeance against the man who wronged him. And it kind of goes from there, and it's got a little of everything in it, right? It's got duels, and it's got it's got a prison break, it's got a treasure hunt, it's got romance, it's got hidden identities and revenge plots and character arcs that are really strong and good. It's just a banger. Like, it's just an absolute banger. And the other one is a much more recent read and more recent publication, and that's The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty, which I read at the end of last year. And again, it's another one. It's a pirate novel set in the Indian Ocean in medieval in the medieval world. It's got, our main character, Amina, is a middle-aged retiree who's pulled out of retirement for a one last job kind of storyline, and a getting the gang back together kind of storyline. It's about pirates. It's got magical artifacts, and it's got kidnappings, and there's just so much fun to be had in this book. It's a wonderful, rip-roaring adventure that I highly recommend. So yeah, those are a couple of really adventurous books that are just super fun. The next one is Samoas, a book that blends 2 or more genres. Again, this is I read a lot of books that are sort of hybrids because I love a hybrid. I love a book that combines multiple kinds of genres together. Like I'm reading I just finished reading a romance, a fantasy romance, not too long ago. I've got some other stuff that I'm planning to read that's more of like a fantasy mystery, and things like that. So there's a lot of stuff I read that could fit this category. But again, the first one that really popped into mind that I really loved was Cahokia Jazz by Frances Spufford, which I talked about in my last wrap-up video, because it was a really amazing read. And it's this combination of a crime novel, hard-boiled detective novel, and a speculative alt history novel, which is a really fun combo that makes it extremely atmospheric, and they mesh so well together, that it almost, it doesn't even feel like a hybrid, because they just go so well together, the two genres, the alt history and the hard-boiled detective of it all, that just it was incredible to me. So and it was just a very well written book. So that's another one that I want to highlight, even though I've already talked about it. I just want to keep raving about it because it's just so good. And then number 6, Do-Si Does. So this is either a book you love that everyone seems to hate, or a book you hate that everyone seems to love. I will say I generally try to emphasize books that I like over books that I don't like, also because I tend to rarely read books that I strongly dislike. But on the other hand, there is one that pops to mind that I really, really, really disliked that seems to have been pretty popular. And it's another one that I read last year. And frankly, like, I'm not even sure why I read it all the way through, because it did not work for me at all. And that is, unfortunately, The Magicians by Lev Grossman. Yeah, I read this book. Well, theoretically, the reason why I finished it was because I was listening to it on audio rather than actually physically reading it, which generally I find it easier to get through audiobooks than if I'm physically reading them. But this was a book that I really I think, but also like I really wanted to like it. I think on paper the premise seemed like something that I should have really liked, because it sort of advertises itself as like, what if Harry Potter and Narnia, but like for grown-ups, and like the magical school is actually pretty brutal and Narnia is like super bad and evil and dark. And I was like, that seems like a really interesting premise. And as someone who's like, I'm familiar with both Harry Potter and Narnia, like the sort of the magical school of it all, and also the portal fantasy of it all, I was like, I should try this. And like, it was blurbed by George R. R. Martin as being like, but of course, I mean, admittedly, George R. R. Martin blurbs a lot of books and it doesn't necessarily mean anything. But, you know, I was just like, well, you know, and a lot of people seem to enjoy it. And then I actually read it, listened to the audio, and boy, it was awful. The main problem I had with it is that the main protagonist is just absolutely absolutely insufferable. And again, I've said before on this channel that like I don't have a problem with protagonists who are theoretically unlikable, protagonists who are shady, protagonists who do bad things for bad reasons, especially female protagonists. On this channel, I support both women's rights and women's wrongs, but the male protagonist of this book was just extremely self-absorbed and extremely, at the same time, unself-aware. And that was just a combo that I was, you know, if a character starts out that way, I expect the character to grow a bit and change a bit over the course of the book and actually gain some self-awareness and start to understand that they, you know, have been like this and that they need to maybe be better, right? If they're a protagonist and they start out like that, I expect them to eventually get better. And that's part of why I got all the way through this book, because I was hoping and hoping and hoping that at some point someone would say something to him and he would realize that he was being just a huge douchebag. And he never got to, it never happened. It never happened. He never became less of a douchebag. And I had no reason to keep continuing with something when the main character is just someone that I absolutely find despicable. Like, I couldn't stand him. I don't understand how anybody could read that book and think that that's a likable and charming character. The other problem I had with it is that it very much suffers from the a white middle-aged dude wrote this syndrome. There was at least one passage that was almost literally a she breasted boobily up the stairs kind of situation. Like, for writing about it like I have very low patience for, again, that's sort of the middle-aged straight white dude writer who insists on describing the breasts of every 18-year-old female character in his novel to a very specific degree. I don't, it skeeves me out. It skeeves me out. It just does. And this book skeeved me out a few times. The other thing that really, really put me off was that the author, not the characters, but the author, uses the word autistic as a pejorative. And that is unacceptable to me. It is simply unacceptable. So yeah, I didn't like that book. It was a bad book. And, you know, that's unfortunate. And seventh question is Thin Mints, one of your all-time favorite books. So to contrast with the last one, I'm going to talk about a book that I haven't really talked about on this channel before, but which I've read a bunch of times, and it's like one of my favorites. And like, well, it's more of a series. And that's the Mary Russell series by Laurie R. King. This is actually Sherlock Holmes fan fiction, basically. It's professionally published Sherlock Holmes fanfic. The first novel in the series is probably my favorite. It's called The Beekeeper's Apprentice. And this is a historical fiction mystery series featuring a young woman named Mary Russell who encounters the great Sherlock Holmes in his retirement they first meet in 1915. So he is well into his retirement, and she is she's a teenager, she's 15 years old when they meet, and they strike up a relationship, and she becomes, his apprentice, and they eventually become partners in crime solving and eventually in life. And especially the first 5 or so novels, I'm pretty sure it's still like going. I haven't read a book in this series in a while, but like the first 4 or 5 novels especially are just really good. Mary Russell is a really, really well-drawn character, and the historical details are amazing. Um, and it's a really fun, in-depth sort of it's both very strong in terms of the plots of the individual books, but also it's very much a character study of both her and of Sherlock Holmes, and it works for me. It works really, really well. And again, the first few books, especially in the series, I've been reading them since I was in high school, I think, again, and I come back to them with relative frequency, despite the fact that I haven't actually read any of the more recent ones. I mean, I think at some point the series probably drops off in quality, but again, the first handful of them are just really excellent. This is probably not for you if you are a Sherlock Holmes purist, right? If you're like a Conan Doyle purist, this is probably not for you. And also, if you're skeeved out by romantic relationships that have a pretty large age gap, you're gonna have a problem with this too. But otherwise, again, like, I think it's really good. The characters are great. The historical details are amazing. And Mary Russell is a really great character, and she makes a really good foil for Sherlock Holmes, at least as Laurie King writes these characters. So yeah, that's just a really fun one for me that I haven't really talked about much on this channel, but it is one of my favorites. So yeah, and then the 8th question is for tagalongs, which is to tag somebody. Honestly, I think most of the people that I follow and subscribe to on YouTube I've already done this tag. I've seen a bunch of people doing it, so I don't even know who hasn't done it yet. So basically, if you're watching this and you haven't done it yet, consider yourself tagged. And that's all I got. I'm honestly kind of shy about calling out specific people for things like, oh, what if they have a bigger channel than me? What if they don't want to do it? What if they don't even know who I am and they're like, why is this person even tagging me? Anyway, that's my own personal hang up. So anyway, that's the Girl Scout cookie tag. Thanks again to Netta for tagging me. And yeah, if you have any thoughts about the books that I've talked about, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Like, subscribe, do all that usual things, and keep watching Shogun on FX, because it's really good. It's continuing to be really good. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!